there and welcome to Global Business Africa. We'll be giving you insight into Africa's business and financial markets. I'm Uche Okoronkwo, coming to you from Kenya's capital, Nairobi. Let's start with a look at the markets. Now, Chinese stocks led emerging market shares higher today. Positive Chinese manufacturing data suddenly eased worries about a broader economic slowdown. And of course, progress in US-China trade talks was an additional boost on markets. Now, on the continent, South Africa's JSE pushing higher today, helped by a positive global and local development, such as Moody's rating pushing back a review. It also recorded its best first quarter performance since 2007, boosted by a 15.2% gain in Naspers. Also coming up on the show today, African leaders meet South African officials to discuss a new wave of xenophobic attacks in the country. Yet another crucial vote on alternatives to Prime Minister Theresa May's Brexit deal. And a Nigerian artist keeps the environment clean while creating stunning decorative items. Well, let's start off the show in South Africa, where the country's International Relations and Cooperation Minister, Lindiwe Sisulu, says the recent attack on foreign nationals is pure criminality. Now, Sisulu made these comments after a meeting she held with heads of diplomatic missions representing various African countries in South Africa. Here's CGTN's Yolisa Njamela with the details.
According to International Relations and Cooperation's Ministry, the violence erupted in the coastal city of Durban was sparked by the killing of two South Africans. One of the South Africans was allegedly shot and killed when they tried to force themselves into a foreign-owned shop, while another was killed at a local mall. The events immediately caused tension and panic amongst the members of particularly the local Malawian community. At least 300 Malawians have since been displaced in Durban.
What happened over the weekend, we believe, with the information available to us, was pure criminality. However, today we went beyond the matter of criminality and we dealt with a matter that some ambassadors feel is still xenophobic and happens on a regular basis, and we're going to sit down and deal with this matter. We are doing everything in our power to make sure that everybody is safe. The Constitution guarantees the safety of everybody, and it is our responsibility to do that.
These things can happen anywhere, in any country, any time. But when problems occur, you get together, you find answers. You make sure that those answers are implemented. I'm not the one to be stuck on definitions, because there is a blurred, probably, definition of what's going on. Where does the xenophobic starts, and when does the criminality start? Okay, it's a combination of all that. What's important is to define the problem, find the sources of these problems, get the relevant people involved, including the community leaders, the religious leaders, the political leaders, the diplomatic, together to find solutions so those things don't occur.
While all the stakeholders who gathered here are horrified about the attacks, the United Nations has expressed its satisfaction in how South Africa has responded.
One thing that is very comforting for us is the fact that the mayor was so forthcoming and so human and so, understanding with the situation, and worked together with the United Nations in trying to bring a solution to the whole issues.
A committee of ambassadors has now been formed and will come up with proposals to be presented to the South African government for possible solutions to this scourge. President Cyril Ramaphosa has also urged ordinary South Africans to take a stand against the spate of violence against foreign nationals, to also ensure that fellow Africans feel safe here in South Africa and not constantly have to look over their shoulders. The International Relations and Cooperations, Police and Home Affairs Ministries will gather again on Friday to forge a way forward on this issue. Yolisa Njamela for CGTN in Pretoria, South Africa.
Well, let's get an update from the ground. Angelo Coppola now joins us in Johannesburg. Angelo, great to have you on the show. Now, Angelo, the last time we did see these targeted attacks was back in 2015 in Johannesburg and in Durban as well. About 7 lives were lost then as immigrants were hunted down. What are the similarities drawn between this attack and certainly the past ones? And has the violence continued on to today?
Well, Uche, as you know, we were reporting on those series of attacks that happened in 2015 in Durban and in Johannesburg. In terms of deaths, we know that there are 2 confirmed deaths, but we're also hearing confirmation numbers of 6 deaths. So it could be either 2 or 6 people that have died as a result of these attacks. Those are both South Africans, as Yolisa was saying, which led to the current attacks. And those displaced Malawians, there's some 300 of them are sitting at a mosque. And if you think back to 2015, we had a similar situation with different nationalities from across the continent gathering in different places, in different camps, at police stations and at community halls and at mosques, because of the intimidation that they felt then. And what's happened now is the intimidation that's been meted out to those Malawian citizens. So those are some similarities there. Then many of those want to go home. That's Malawians we're talking about now. Last time around, the trigger event was also a criminal event. Another similarity is that the government refused to call it xenophobia. They're preferring the term criminality. Happened in 2008, 2015, and again now. So there's another similarity. And then there's the perceived lack of action by the South African police services. Last time round, and again this time. In many instances, the attacks have taken place after dark when police services aren't as active on the ground as they should be. What is different this time round, according to the Directorate of International Relations and Cooperation spokesperson, is that the criminals are in fact targeting South African and foreign businesses. So there's this similarity compared to 2015, but it's still a dangerous situation, Uche.
Quite right. And as we heard there, South Africa's Foreign Minister Lindiwe Sisulu, she called an urgent meeting with Africa's ambassadors following the attacks. Now, a main concern for them is how much protection of life and property will the government provide. As we saw there in the meeting, what were the highlights for you, Angelo?
Well, ironically, the first thing that jumped at me was the fact that just last week, a national action plan had been unveiled and announced to deal with racism and xenophobia. That plan now needs an implementation plan. It's something that was discussed in the meeting today and also at the briefing afterwards. South Africa is not really good at implementing plans, so they need to be working on a plan with deadlines and milestones there. We haven't seen that plan or any details just yet. The ambassadors, though, do believe that all stakeholders, and that includes the churches and the NGOs, need to be involved in any solutions, but I'm not sure how that's going to work, because it's got to be run by the police services. They've got to get involved and get more active, and they've in fact asked for a couple of extra days to investigate the attacks, the deaths, and also an SMS that's doing the rounds at the moment, which is threatening foreigners with violence after the 8 May elections. And according to DIRCO, they're saying that that SMS is legit. It's not fake news like a lot of the material that's been on the social networks over the past couple of days. That is old material and unrelated to any truth, as it were. So we also have those Malawian citizens who are waiting to either be sent home or be incorporated into the communities. So we're waiting with bated breath to make sure nothing happens overnight, Uche.
Now, we have seen President Ramaphosa and several other leaders in the country condemning these xenophobic attacks. Some say this is a symptom of a painfully high unemployment rate, about 27% in the country, and certainly the struggling economy, Angelo. So what are the realities you think fueling these attacks?
Well, it is quite complicated. There is the unemployment level that's causing issues. It's about foreigners running businesses in townships that have provided goods and services that have undercut the prices of the locals and what they can afford to or buy at and sell at to their consumers. It's the perception that the foreigners may not be registered and have their businesses registered, so that's also an issue. It's also about political optimism or opportunism, as it were. Parties are playing to the anxiety that people are feeling at the moment and also that desperation. It's also about criminality too. Apparently the criminals are forming gangs to attack those soft targets like the foreign-owned businesses because they're in the minority in the townships that they operate in and live in. But what's happening now is that some of the foreigners are starting to arm and defend themselves, and that's a recipe for disaster and for conflict. And already we've seen those fatalities. So hopefully the police services can do their job and maintain law and order, which here.
Well, as always, many thanks, Angelo, for that update. Of course, Angelo Coppola joining us there in Johannesburg. Well, let's move on now to Tunisia, where the government has raised the country's fuel prices by about 4%. The move is part of an effort to rein in its budget deficit, as well as meet reforms requested by the international lenders. The IMF has been pressing Tunisia to trim its budget deficit to offset a rise in oil prices. That, of course, is pressuring already strained public finances in the country. CGTN's Adnan Shaushi with the details.
The Tunisian Ministry of Industry and Energy raised fuel prices on Sunday by about 4%. The mechanism of automatic adjustment of the prices of fuel was approved by Parliament in 2008 and entered into force in 2016. The decision caused fury among Tunisian consumers.
The new fuel price hike was approved only days after salary hikes. Our purchasing power is at the lowest level.
Consumers are fed up from bad news. I wish I could sell my car because fuel is now very expensive.
The Ministry of Industry has extended the validity of 5 hydrocarbon exploration permits at the request of their operators to boost fuel production south of the country.
Tunisia's oil production has significantly dropped in the past years, reaching an average of 42,000 barrels per day. Accelerating investment and production of renewable energy is the best alternative.
Experts at the Tunisia Joint Chambers of Commerce believe the solution lies in investing in renewable energy.
Tunisia's oil production has significantly dropped in the past years, reaching an average of 42,000 barrels per day. Accelerating investment and production of renewable energy is the best alternative.
According to the Prime Ministry, the government's agenda for the next period will focus on achieving renewable energy projects. However, fuel prices will not drop in the North African state. The Minister of Industry and Energy indicated that every dollar increase in oil prices requires additional financial resources of about $40 million from state budget. Therefore, the energy challenge will be among the top national priorities in Tunisia. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
And now let's take a look at our corporate headlines today. Saudi Arabia's national oil company, Saudi Aramco, has obtained the 5th highest investment grade rating ahead of its first global bond sale. Now, the state oil giant was the world's most profitable company in 2018, posting about $355.9 billion in revenue and a net income of about $111 billion. Aramco is expected to meet international bond investors this week for its debut in the international capital markets. And Kenya's largest bank by assets, Kenya Commercial Bank, is set to send a revised binding offer to acquire the country's collapsed lender, Imperial Bank's assets. The updated proposal contains significantly enhanced terms and will be deliberated on by the Kenya Deposit Insurance Corporation Board later this week. And the Development Bank of the BRICS Group of Emerging Economies has approved around $790 million of loans for 3 South African projects at its 4th annual meeting in Cape Town. The multilateral bank is also set to consent to a total loans of about $2.3 billion in the country, as of course it plans to double its loan approvals from the current $8 billion to $16 billion this year. And finally, multinational pharmaceutical company Aspen Pharmacare is the 5th largest company by market cap to list on the alternative A2X exchange. Now, the firm is set to retain its primary listing on the JSE. The listing brings the number of companies available for trade on A2X to about 18, with a combined market cap of over $155 billion. And that's a look at our corporate headlines. Well, we're heading into a quick break now. Here's a look at what's coming up. Egypt introduces fresh fuel regulations that link fuel octane 95 to international prices. And a group of consumer goods companies form an alliance to tackle plastic pollution in Africa.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global business, only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible and why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sutra. Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN, see the difference.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and Global Business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN. Welcome back. Now, Egypt's government has decided to keep the price of 95 octane petrol on the local market at 45 US cents per litre through the second quarter of 2019. This, of course, means that the subsidies on octane 95 will be scrapped completely and the price will be reviewed every 3 months. That's according to the international prices. Now, octane 95 is used by high-end cars, which account for less than 10% of Egypt's total consumers. Well, let's get those details from Yasser Hakim. He joins us now in Cairo. Very welcome to the show, Yasser. Now, of course, we know the government was meant to begin implementing an automatic pricing mechanism for this octane 95 fuel, basically linking it to the price of Brent crude on the global market. Explain to us, Yasser, why this decision not to raise its price on the local market.
They have decided to keep it fixed at the moment because the components for production, import of oil and distributing the oil, the fuel octane 95 have remained fixed, and the increase in the value of the Egyptian pound against the dollar has kept also the prices lower than before. So they decided to keep the price of the octane 95 as it is for the first 3 months, also to avoid any inflationary effects. Inflation has gone up in the last couple of months, year on year, higher than expected by the government, wants to keep it down. You've seen the central bank last week. They've decided to also keep interest rates as it is to avoid the inflationary effects. So it just goes with the policy that we've seen in the last week or so of, yes, they want to start with the octane 95 to be scrapped totally, but the review will begin, or the new prices will begin after 3 months. And it will be not a drastic increase or decrease. We're talking about an average plus 10% and minus 10% of increase in the price or decrease in the price every 3 months. So they also put a limit on the increase in prices to avoid drastic changes.
Well, on that note, what does this mean for the state's plan to raise fuel prices going forward? Should consumers in Egypt still expect fuel prices to increase this year?
Yes, and the government made it clear it's part of this 5-year plan. Actually, it's trying to slow it down a bit. Next June should have been the last phase where fuel will be scrapped completely, or subsidies would be scrapped completely on all types of fuel. The popular or the highly consumed 92 octane and the 80 octane, those are the two that are mostly used in Egypt. They will follow the 95 mechanism, however, not at the same rate. The government says it will reduce the subsidies on 92 and 80 in June, but will not cap it completely. We'll probably see how the octane 95 mechanism will be working in the next year or so, and then go to the last phase of totally cutting subsidies off the fuel from all types of cars and vehicles. So we expect in June there will be a reduction, but not a total scrap of subsidies for fuel at the moment. Same with electricity. It will also be gradually done over the next 2 years.
Now, of course, some analysts are saying this decision could be mainly influenced by the rising inflation we're seeing in Egypt. Of course, President El-Sisi trying to curb the impact on consumers. He actually recently announced a number of moves that could alleviate the impact of inflation on citizens there. Give us the highlights of what that plan entails.
Yes, like I said, he kept the prices as it is now, kept the interest rates as it is to keep inflation intact. But he's also came up with 2 very important decisions for Egyptians and the higher number of the population, which is the limited wages and lower wages part of the population, where he decided that he would increase the minimum wage from 1,200 Egyptian pounds to 2,000. We're talking 80% increase in the minimum wage. He's also increased the pensions for over 60%. So those two, which will cost the government around $5.5 billion a year, have been very welcomed by the people, because it comes at a time that it can help balance a bit the inflationary effects of the devaluation of the Egyptian pound, the increase in prices, the increase in fuel, and so forth. So those 2 issues just took place, or those 2 decisions just took place this week. He's also promised to increase social security measures, social funding for social security programs, health, education, as well as SMEs for women, poor women, and poor villages. So there are a number of programs, social programs, to try to lift the burden of the Egyptians who have been suffering from the higher prices in the last few years.
Well, as always, many thanks, Yasser, for your insights. Of course, that was Yasser Hakim joining us there in Cairo. Well, let's stay in Egypt, where the government has also approved the state budget for the fiscal year to June 2020. They're targeting a deficit of 7.2%, GDP growth of 6.1%, and of course, a debt to GDP ratio of about 89%. Now, the 2019-2020 budget has been based on an exchange rate of 18 Egyptian pounds per dollar and international oil prices of about $68 per barrel. Egypt's fiscal year, of course, begins in June every year. Here's Yasser Hakim again with the details.
The government is aiming to reduce the deficit to 7.2% from a current 8.4%. The targeted economic growth in the next fiscal year is 6.1% from 5.5%. But how will this be achieved?
The priority is to cut down on expenditure, and it's clear in the budget that the plan is to scrap subsidies on fuel and electricity, which take most of the revenue, especially the 92 and 95 octane, that's highly subsidized by the government.
But where will the saved money from expenditure cuts be channeled?
First of all, to maintain national security and combat terrorism. Then comes expenditure on education and health services. It's extremely important to improve the quality of public services and social security programs for Egyptians. Developing the education system in schools and also hospitals and health insurance for the poor are high on the agenda.
Some Egyptians have voiced their opinions about the announced budget.
Let's start with improving the educational system, developing the schools and reviewing the curriculum to help students become more creative, like Norway and Europe as a whole, which doesn't exist here.
We need more subsidies and services because the population is increasing, but the funds for services are not keeping up to sustain our needs.
For most experts, the main challenge for the government is to repay the mushrooming international and local debt. The draft has been welcomed by the National Assembly, but for most of the public, they're focusing on whether the government will succeed in reducing prices and the unemployment rates to 9.3% as promised in the draft. Yas Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Now, Egypt is also planning to export about 19 military armored vehicles to Burundi, a step military experts in Cairo hailed as a new chapter in the country's industrial capabilities. Late last year, Cairo invited African military officials to attend its first defense exhibition. The event certainly aimed at marketing Egyptian military products to African and Arab countries. Here's Adel El Marhoui with more.
Egypt is entering a new chapter of military production. The Arab Organization for Industrialization announced an arms exportation deal with Burundi. 19 FAT 300 armored vehicles will be produced in the first African deal announced this year.
For long, African countries have been importing from Egypt light weapons like rifles, machine guns, mortar shells and other projectiles. The significance of this agreement with Burundi is that it moves Egypt to heavy military machinery exportation, which Egypt has been giving a lot of focus in the field of military production.
Based on the designs of the German armored vehicle TH-390, Egypt developed FAT. With its multi-purpose design, FAT 300 can be used to transport soldiers equipped with heavy machine guns or rocket launchers.
Egypt benefited a lot from the experiences of foreign countries like China, South Korea and Pakistan. We have military cooperation with them and their joint military production programs. With France, for example, we've produced high-tech heavy machinery like the Gazelle helicopter and the Go-Wind frigates.
Egypt's first defense expo, EDEX, has opened opportunities for exportation. Besides the economical added value to the country, Egypt aims to enhance its military production capabilities and become a hub for military production and trade in Africa. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
You're watching Global Business Africa. Let's head into a quick break. Still to come. Yet another crucial vote on alternatives to Prime Minister May's Brexit deal. And rural Spaniards demand better public services and job opportunities in the country.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
For lucrative economic data out of the country, the country's foreign currency reserves.
With a dedicated and diverse team of anchors, CGTN now brings Africa to the palm of your hand.
Firina Karibe in the heart of Nairobi, which is bustling.
From everyday heroes to the continent's most powerful figures, we bring their voices to you.
We haven't changed. And this is something most of us are very excited about.
We bring you news that's changing perspectives.
I'm Uche Okoronkwo reporting from Nairobi's city center.
News that brings Africa to the world. CGTN. See the difference. How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Accra is my kind of city. That's because when I'm here, I feel like I'm back home in Lagos or Abidjan, which are two of the major cities I grew up in. Business in Africa is high risk. After about a decade covering business news on the continent, I've learned it's all about the high risk, but also the high returns and the high energy. You simply have to adjust in order to keep pace. When I started out as a journalist, my dream was to open people's minds to the different perspectives. From the CEO in the boardroom to the trader out in the street, we all have different stories. From Accra to Addis Ababa, from Cairo to Cape Town. And I wouldn't have it any other way. Here at CGTN, we realize that Africa is on the move, and it's moving fast, but we're moving right along with it. I'm Uche Okoronkwo, and I'm a business anchor and reporter at CGTN. Let's recap today's headlines. In South Africa, ongoing discussions on xenophobic attacks have been held between the country's foreign minister and ambassadors from African countries. Now, this follows attacks against foreigners in the coastal city of Durban. The violence was sparked by the killing of 2 South Africans. Authorities there are now calling on ordinary South Africans to take a stand against the spate of violence which has been leveled against foreign nationals. And Mozambican and international health workers are racing to contain the outbreak of cholera in the city of Beira. Now, the cases of the disease have jumped to 517, and the first death has been recorded. This comes after Cyclone Idai hit Beira and swept across central Mozambique, displacing about 98,000 people. And Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir has acknowledged the legitimacy of the anti-government protesters' demands. Speaking while addressing the country's parliament for the first time since the government imposed a state of emergency, Bashir, however, condemned the destruction of property and other unlawful acts that have left some people dead. Violent protests have rocked the country since December, with demonstrators calling on the veteran leader to step down. And that's a recap of today's headlines. Well, let's get the latest on Brexit. British MPs are set to vote on 4 to the 8 Brexit proposals, which have been tabled for a second series of indicative votes on Monday. Now, these include the unilateral right of exit from the backstop, a no deal in the absence of a withdrawal agreement, and a public vote to prevent a no deal, amongst others. An inquiry will follow to assess a future relationship likely to be acceptable to Brussels and have majority support in the UK. Well, let's get the latest on Brexit from Richard Bestick. He joins us now in London. Richard, welcome to the show. Suddenly another tense week kicks off in the UK. MPs voting on alternatives to May's deal, specifically on a customs union and a second referendum, of course, amongst others. Is the aim here, Richard, to just test support for a new deal, or could we see today's outcome change the course of Brexit going forward?
It's quite possible, but not necessarily so, Uche. You're absolutely right. Here we are, 11 days from the final crashing out of the British economy from the European Union after 45 years. And as yet, Parliament here and the government have no plan for where it's going to go. So MPs are gathered in that house behind me there, trying to coalesce around something that would be acceptable to a majority of members of Parliament. So far, the European Union has got tired of hearing no, no, no from the British Parliament, wants to hear them say yes to something. You mentioned a couple of the alternatives there, a customs union or a common market 2.0. Now, both of those have got some traction in the Parliament. However, there are big problems with them, in so much as UK Prime Minister Theresa May and a large tranche of her cabinet have consistently set their faces against any kind of customs union, because it doesn't allow Britain to make its own deals outside in the world at large, and of course it keeps the freedom, the four freedoms, including the freedom of movement, which was a major part of that referendum in 2016. So if that gets through, and it has a chance of getting through, if that gets through, we could be set for a constitutional clash between Parliament and the government.
And of course, there's certainly talk of Prime Minister May bringing her deal before Parliament for a fourth time this week. What are the chances this could happen? And in addition to that, Richard, could we see another challenge to her leadership going forward?
Well, let's rule that one out for starters. That won't happen because she's already been challenged once. You remember that vote? 1/3 of her own parliamentary party voted against her, but she squeaked through, and now they can't do it again until next December. They've got to wait another 12 months from the last challenge. Uche, to take the first part of your question, is there a possibility that Britain might crash out, that they might have a general election? Well, that's quite possible. Could she come back with a fourth attempt at getting her much disliked deal through after 3 defeats? Yes, it is possible. Should they not be able to coalesce around any one agreement tonight in their vote in a few hours' time from now, she could quite possibly bring it back and ask MPs to have another go at it. Quite whether the Speaker, John Bercow, would allow that is another matter. But the point would be, she'd say, look, you can't agree, this is the best deal, vote for it, and put it before them for a fourth time. And that's a real possibility, not an April Fool's trick.
Quite right, Richard. Now let's talk about the impact all this Brexit chaos has had on the country. We've seen the currency quite volatile. Some analysts say the UK is losing about £700 million per day due to Brexit. In fact, veteran investor and fund manager Mark Mobius, he actually said that this whole situation makes UK look like an emerging economy. Now give us a sense of the fallout you've seen for businesses in the UK from all this Brexit chaos.
I think what we have here really is a tale of two economies. In one respect, the British economy is quite stable. The currency is holding up to one extent or another, and employment in Britain is at its highest level in years. Today, for example, the minimum wage went up, and so people are earning a little bit more and keeping ahead of an inflation rate which is within the Bank of England's preferred rate. So that's one thing. But what's worrying organisations like the Confederation of British Industry and the Institute of Directors and of course the TUC, the Trades Union Congress, is the lack of investment in the British economy. It has fallen off a cliff. Now, although that's not impacting on the economy at the moment, the fear among economists is that it will further down the track. Unless, of course, some remedy is found. Whether Parliament can agree on a customs union, business and industry is very keen to keep as close as it possibly can to the European Union economy so it can benefit from that marketplace of 500 million people. And if it does, then the British economy may well recover. There will be a bounce back effect. Should they crash out in 11 days because they can't find agreement in Parliament, then the consequences, even according to the Treasury and the Bank of England, would be severe indeed. Uche.
Well, as always, great to have you on the show, Richard. Of course, that was Richard Bestick joining us there in London. Now, of course, there's a lot of discussion around the impact Brexit will have. One of the questions is, how will the transportation of goods fare with a no-deal scenario? Well, CGTN's Mariam Zaidi spoke with people working at a major cross-border corridor to find out what their concerns are.
Separated 52 miles by sea, over 55 million tonnes of goods are transported between Dover and Calais a year. This is one of the major transport corridors linking up continental Europe to the United Kingdom. Demand for road freight transportation increases 6% year on year. But Brexit, and especially a hard Brexit, poses a substantial risk to the industry, even if Brexit may have a short stay of execution, at least till April the 12th.
As soon as the Brexit kicks in, there will be border checks. There will be delays at borders. And as you can imagine, time is money. We're talking about 2.6 million trucks a year, and that is on a single day up to 10,000 trucks, meaning 300 an hour, so 12 every second.
And Belgian-based haulier Nina Trans, who do 20% of their business in the UK, are already feeling the looming Brexit pinch. Deliveries that normally took half a day now take drivers too. It's risking production lines, and those delays are costing their clients 50% more.
Already clients now are cancelling trips to England because they don't know when it's going to get there by road, and they are sending it by airplane already. So yes, we're going to lose jobs due to this, because it's going to be way too expensive to send it over the road.
They're doing their best to prepare their drivers for Brexit, arming them with every possible licence and making sure they carry a valid passport on all journeys.
We know when we will leave to the UK, but we won't know when we will get back. The biggest problem, I think, will be that we are stranded on the road. We're not at a parking lot. We are just in the middle of the road. So I don't really think that's safe for anybody.
Port authorities in both Dover and Calais are preparing for massive disruptions.
Tomorrow, if there is Brexit, we'll have more work to do. And the risk is that if we don't get the right tools and people in place now, there will be even longer lines of trucks than the ones we have today.
So can the UK coalesce and find a solution to end the Brexit groundhog? Well, while they're given room to try, the good news is that not even a potential hard Brexit will stop road transportation, even if they are gridlocked. Temporary agreements will go into effect that will allow trucking companies to keep calm and carry on for 9 months. And the government, too, will slash tariffs on 87% of imported goods to zero. Mariam Zaidi, CGTN, Brussels.
Well, let's move on to Spain now, where more and more villagers are moving to Spain's cities for better job opportunities. And that's because infrastructure in much of the countryside hasn't been improved in years. Well, that's upset those who have stayed behind, and they're demanding some changes now. About 50,000 Spaniards from rural areas marched in the capital city of Madrid on Sunday in an effort to gain better public services.
The marchers in central Madrid accused the government of treating them like second-class citizens. They came from villages and small towns across Spain, many of which have not seen any improvements in infrastructure in years. Even mayors participated.
Better financing and better preparation for the villagers, because right now we are missing almost everything. And each time they are cutting off more things, from doctors to teachers. We barely have infrastructures to battle the lack of population.
Juan's village currently has only about 1,000 people. The latest Eurostat figures show that the population density in Spain's rural areas has drastically declined to only 26 people per square kilometer in recent decades. Also, 90% of the population is now concentrated in 30% of the country's territory, namely in Madrid and the coastal areas. That leaves just 10% of its people spread over large swaths of the interior. They're now asking for solutions to the depopulation problem.
It seems we are second-class citizens when we have the same rights as the rest of the people. What we demand is really to get investment so the infrastructures we need can be constructed.
Spain's socialist government last week announced measures to battle the lack of population. The effort includes technical and digital development in rural areas. Sunday's march came ahead of the April 28th general election in Spain. Rural areas could play a key role in deciding if the ruling socialists stay in power. Current Spanish election law gives more weight to underpopulated areas. Guanxin CGTN.
Now, this year's Shanghai Fashion Week, featuring more than 110 collections from around the globe, ushers the city into its 17th year of transforming itself into a world fashion hub. But it's not just a week of models and runways. Running alongside the design show are trade fairs established to give the city a permanent business infrastructure to support its designers. CGTN's Yuan has been finding out how it works.
Hua Jia has been showcasing her designs at the city's annual fashion event for 5 years, ever since she returned from New York and set up her own studio. Hua describes herself as growing along with the city's fashion week. The first time she attended, it was just shining runways, high fashion models, and anxious designers who would just fly in for the week and then fly out again. But in addition, the event now offers more of an integrated industrial chain. Running alongside the fashion show is a trade fair that allows designers to look for possible buyers and partners. Established 4 years ago, Mode serves as a bridge between designers, particularly emerging designers, and retail outlets. Hua thinks having a platform ready for young designers is the most important part of the event for them.
What I like best about Mode are the real retail connections. One new thing is that this year they have invited foreign buyers, and we are getting orders from them.
Hua says she's connected with dozens of new customers at this year's 4-day Mode trade fair, and it will be shipping to them at some of the 100 stores nationwide who now buy from her. Hundreds of other designers like Hua are here hoping to expand their business. Booking a stall involves no more than filling out an application and showing some designs. The venue fees for designers range from 15,000 to 20,000 yuan for the 4-day trade fair. The fee includes introductions to buyers and e-commerce sites.
Designers can show their work on the runway at Xintiandi and then sell them here. We serve as a platform for designers where they can get a better sense of the market, and that gives them good feedback for their designs. Many designers want to go online with our help since we have a partnership with Tmall, but that's not a right move for every new designer. They can accumulate experience at Mode first.
Foreign designers are also interested in learning more about China's fashion markets through Fashion Week and the Mode Trade Fair.
For me, it's a really pleasure seeing Shanghai because Shanghai is a really good market for the sale the bag. I think this is really good for the new designer, is good for the buyer.
The Shanghai Commission of Commerce says more than 800 fashion brands opened their first stores in Shanghai last year, and more than 3,000 brands held the worldwide debuts of their new collections here. The city continues to build its retail capacity as well. French department store chain Galeries Lafayette opened its Shanghai outlet last week and says it has plans to open about 10 new stores in China by 2025. Yuan, ICS for CGTN, Shanghai.
Well, let's shift focus now and take a look at how commodities performed today. Gold prices easing as stock markets rallied. That's, of course, after upbeat Chinese economic data did soothe some concern about the global economy and boosted risk appetite on the markets. Of course, losses were still limited by a sliding dollar today. Meanwhile, oil prices were up. Brent crude up almost 2% on the day, adding to gains in the first quarter as concerns about supply outweigh the fear of a slowing global economy. Let's take a quick break now. Here's a look at what's coming up. A Nigerian artist keeps the environment clean while creating stunning decorative items.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Kanata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Well, let's go to Nigeria now, where paper craft production is gaining in popularity and subsequently giving a boost to conservation efforts in the country. Now, a young entrepreneurial artist is selling specialized handicraft decorations made out of recycled paper, which also helps to protect the environment.
They say beauty is in the eyes of the beholder, but here in Lagos, it can also be in the hands of those who hold used paper. Funmi Adubi, a self-taught artist, creates decorative items from recycled paper. She seeks to develop her passion for handmade decor as a means of artistic expression. Techniques used include folding, cutting, molding and layering to achieve the desired result.
The main story behind it is
practically recycling. Instead of trashing paper, like the benefits of or the uses of paper, you can actually use old magazines and make flowers out of them. You can quill, you can frame them, you can use them to make boxes, you can use them to make decorative pieces for your homes.
The young entrepreneur also teaches interested students the craft. Funmi started pursuing this skill in 2016 after selling off her confectionery business. She uses various colors and textures and later binds them together with glue to form her decorative designs. It can take up to 15 days to make complex designs. She has over time managed to grow her pool of customers who now regularly buy her pieces.
Challenges I first encountered was actually convincing people to buy the craft. But over time, when I was consistent and I didn't stop, people understood that this is actually beautiful, and I had to post the various uses of paper flowers, not just limited to backdrops. You can actually use them to beautify your wall space in your homes, your office space, decorate your child's wall space, revamp your office, events. There are so many uses. You can use them as centerpiece for events.
The 29-year-old sells her products to event companies and individual clients while using social media to market her work.
Made for a client,
She also makes customized designs to fit different client needs.
The Nigerians are actually adapting to it. Like, whenever they see my flowers, they're like, wow, is this really paper? Can I touch it? What materials do you use? As in, how did you do this? And that's why I train people too, to make them know that you can actually make something beautiful out of just papers. And yeah, for event planners, a lot of them are fascinated with the fact that you can actually use them for events. It's something new.
Prices for the designs can be from $40 and above, depending on the complexity of the design. The artist says she wants to experiment with more paper craft techniques and reach more potential clients. Dina Matengo, CGTN.
Which I made for a client.
Well, before we close the show, here's a quick look at how Africa's currencies performed today. South Africa's rand firmer. It certainly was easily the best performing emerging market currency today. This, of course, after Moody's opted not to review the country's credit status. That reduced the threat to the economy and certainly to the currency going forward. Meanwhile, Kenya's shilling holding steady against the dollar, and that's due to inflows from investors abroad into local government debt. Well, that's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. Remember, you can send your feedback to the contacts on your screen. You can also follow us on our various digital media platforms. From me, Uche Okoronkwo, and of course the rest of the team, thanks for watching.